Remember, I was trying to describe to you how we pull out the technology from ourselves and put it in front of us. And until then, it's kind of part of us, but when we put it out, it kind of looks like something by itself, and it has its own movement and its own power. And in this process, something that gets missed out is the fact that the power of technology is actually something that a huge number of people over millions and millions of hours are incorporating into it. You just spend 1.5 hours putting your energy into one logic gate. Now you want to imagine that multiplied 1,000-fold, 1,000,000-fold over the past at least 70 years since computing technology has been on this earth. And it's another thing is, normally whenever an art form, for example, changes, you have a kind of painting and then that becomes a different kind of painting. Or an architecture form, you have a certain building and that becomes a different building. But here, in case of technology, especially the computing one, it doesn't replace, but it adds on. That's the uniqueness of this kind of thing. Even though Boolean algebra is 140 years old, till today you're using exactly the same thing. It's only built on, layer upon layer, layer upon layer, complexity upon complexity. So this cumulative effect makes the complexity of technology look so staggering. Even in art forms and things like that, the changes happen, but because when every change happens, the previous one doesn't overlap it. But in computing, it always stacks on. So once you have kind of a big-nosed human being, all right, so he's staring open-mouthed at that. And this has actually been drawn out of that. And now the crucial element is in what happens here, what do you see and how do you tackle it? When you're looking at computing as such, based on the experience that you had with the logic gates, you see that what makes it possible to make the computing complicated is actually the layering of structure upon structure upon structure, and each one of those structures corresponds to a concept. Now, when you look at this, there is a hierarchy. The lowest of the hierarchy is what we saw today, that of the logic gates. But then you have other concept, other concept, other concept coming on top of it. And this is something that is used by many tech entrepreneurs all over the place today. You talk to the CEO of Google, or the top folks in tech, they will tell you that the way technology is moving, once we crack the code of getting concepts which are hierarchical, the computer can do anything the human being can do. That is the idea that is repeated over and over again in several different shapes, sizes, and forms all across Silicon Valley. So when you look at it carefully, every structure, if it creates a concept, or it comes from a concept, just like we had to put the concepts into the logic gates. If every structure is actually a materialization of a concept, then if you go up the ladder of concepts, where does it actually lead? And it's here that the work of Carl Unger is extremely important as the extension of what was done in philosophy by Steiner. Carl Unger looks at it from a different angle, and he sees that when you're looking at concepts, when you're looking at the conceptual side of thought, and you try to look at the concept of a concept, in the concept of a concept, you find the individual human being. This is remember, I was mentioning to you that the uniqueness of the path of philosophy of freedom is this is the first time that you have thinking about thinking. Now, in that thinking about thinking, taking into account both the concept and the percept, if you look at the concept of the concept, it leads you to the individual human being. So what happens when you're looking at the concept of a hierarchy? The concept of a hierarchy is just another concept, right? But the concept of a concept covers everything there is. And that is how a human individual actually has the capacity to affect everything there is. That is the key of what it means to be human, or at least one big key to what it means to be human. So when you are having these ideas thrown about, that okay, so we are going to take again the more mechanical part of a concept, materialize it, and then you're going to layer it over with several hierarchies of concepts, and you have the idea that it will overcome what a human being can do. You have to realize that even hierarchy is just one single concept. It is very different from concept of a concept. So my basic point over here is, even in the realm of philosophy, a clear thought will immediately inform you of where human capacity lies and where mechanical capacity lies. So these are the things. And then when you keep all of this in mind and kind of churn it around, you realize that the entire worldview that we have today is kind of skewed in a certain way. And I will try to show that using another hierarchy. You have the simple mineral, plant, animal, and human. Now, the skewing that happens most often is this is trying to be explained through that. This is being explained through that. These two realms are somehow something that creates an allergy. Because whenever you look at biology and even plant physiology and the question of life, what is the main overarching theme? Our mineral structures are going to get so complicated that they're going to become alive. Yep. And on the other hand, when looking at a human being, the approach is man is an advanced animal. So you have a combination of the mineral force and the animal force, which forms the basis of today's worldview. and what it leaves out is this transition and this transition. And this is not something that we are all consciously aware of, but whenever this is pointed out in any kind of audience, it is quite probable that there is some resistance to go from there to there and to go from there to there. For instance, it will look like, okay, so all right, if plant is really so different from mineral, maybe it's still possible for the mineral to somehow become a plant. You do not want to let go of that particular idea. If you observe the thought process that goes on in several different streams, when you suggest life is distinct from mineral, at the back of the mind there is a repulsion. It says, no, it's still possible. Maybe, a belief. Maybe someday it will be possible. Now, of course, that doesn't mean to say that this concept as such is invalid, but what I'm trying to point out is whether that maybe is coming from knowledge or that maybe is coming from an inner resistance. And the same thing happens with the relation between human and animal, because what is the key feature of animal behavior? As soon as there is an input, there is an output. As soon as there is a sensation, there is a reaction. There is nothing that comes in between sensation and reaction. So the nervous system of the human being is something that we share in common with animals. And because we do that, and because the electrical basis of all our machines builds itself on it, it takes neurophysiology and neural networks as the basis for building of computing engines, it automatically means that there is a generic push in this direction that you have to be aware of in the human being. And at the same time, what in the human being corresponds to the plant? One thing that does correspond to the plant is the fact that we are alive, but the other thing that corresponds to the plant is the fact that we can give life to our thoughts. Creative thought is the place in the human being where plant life is still alive in us. So if you look at it as a whole, when you are building technology, by keeping in mind only the nervous system which we share with the animals and the mineral system which we share with the minerals basically. So this is more going to be the skeleton, let's say. When you're building something that emphasizes these two and decreases these, then you naturally expect symptoms. Right? Why are we doing all this? The reason we are doing all this is the morning session was to show you how this out here works. Now what we are trying to find out is how this works and how to offset what happens there. That's the purpose. That's why we're looking at the human entirety and looking at the distinctions that happen inside to see what is the effect on these realms. So the first thing is right there. When we are using something that actually belongs to this level as a way to do something that belongs to this level, what happens? What are the distinguishing features of the senses that only the human being has. The one important feature is the sense of distinct memory. Individuality is grounded in memory. Individuality is also grounded in the capacity to create concepts. Of course, we have already gone through that. And at the same time, individuality is also grounded in the capacity to sense another individuality, which is also called the sense of the ego. You have the sense of the ego only because you have an ego. And you have an ego mostly because of the fact that the memory supports your ego to exist. Without it, without having a center in terms of our memories, who you are as an individuality starts coming into question. If you cannot remember what you did yesterday and day before and the day before, if it is just a few days, it's all right. But if it is large chunks of time, then there are problems. Even larger chunks of time, then identity crisis hits. And if you observe the surroundings carefully, you'll notice that that function of memory, sensing the ego, thinking, these are the ones that are getting pushed from here to here. So, and of course, from either from here to here or from here to here, in both these directions. So what happens when you're using this without realizing it? The symptoms start off with an initial inability to remember things. One of the first symptoms that come up is the fact that we forget so much, so often, that it's freaky. And this happens over and over, especially when the screen comes in front. How many of you have had the experience that, oh, wait a minute, I need to look that up. You pulled out your phone, and 15 minutes later, you're looking at completely something different.
Doesn't have to be 15 minutes. So on there, set your alarm, wake up in the morning, 10 minutes later, you still
Yes,
set your alarm yet.
exactly. Memory, yeah. It's the memory that is getting slightly tweaked without even a clear noticing of it. Then you have thinking. We have kind of covered that, but it's also very important to know that if we think that thinking only has to do with the kind of thinking that can be mechanized, then one of the things that happens is all the forces, all the strength or effort that would actually go into the thinking would start dissipating. And when that happens, you realize lack of concentration. Whereas earlier, one would see, or maybe those who are older can remember, spending large amounts of time just focusing on one book, or large amounts of time just focusing on learning something. That somehow starts evaporating. Why is that? Why is that? It's because when you're looking at thinking and converting it into execution of a result, the execution of a result does not allow the thinking to gain its own force. So instead of thinking, you're constantly executing this or that result. And that process, when it's taken to a certain extent, you start realizing, uh-oh, I cannot concentrate anymore. And this capacity for concentration is something that is the very beginning of all meditative practices. And it's mentioned even when you read Steiner's Knowledge of the Higher Worlds, that the immediate jumping from one sensation to another is something that has to be crucially avoided because it drastically hinders occult development. This is the kind of sentence that comes up when you look at any meditative practice, mostly non-Eastern. today, and that is offering us a clue which we will have to follow up later on. But thinking starts going away because concentration goes away. And it's interesting, this is a book by Mark O'Connell, and it says, "To be a machine," and it documents all the people in the world who are making it their life mission to be a machine. And there is in fact one person who is mentioned here. His name is Anders, on page 20. He says something like this. One second, guys. Yeah. Okay, so first there is a description of the surroundings. There is an odd ritual. The scene is dimly lit, and there are computers, beach desktop towers, cuboid monitors. A young man stands facing us, both arms raised above his head in an oddly hieratic gesture. I think a sacramental gesture almost. In a lilting Scandinavian staccato that lends his voice a mechanistic quality, he begins to speak. "The data, the code, the communications," he says, "forever, amen." With these invocations, he moves his arms downward, then outward to either side, before clasping his hands to his chest. He turns about the room, bestowing a gesture of benediction on the 4 points of the compass, speaking in each of these positions the hallowed name of a prophet of the computer age: Alan Turing, John von Neumann, Charles Babbage, Ada Lovelace. Then he stands perfectly still, this priestly young man, arms outspread in a cruciform posture. "Around me shines the bits," he says, "and in me is the bytes. The data, the code, the communications, forever, amen." And there are actually people like that. What I mean to say is, there's a group of people who have made it a dedicated goal in life to create machines which make all human thinking pretty much a waste of time. And it's actually mentioned even by the CEO of Google. Google CEO Eric Schmidt suggested that eventually you'll have an implant where if you just think about a fact, it will tell you the answer. These are extreme visions which I am bringing here, not simply for the purpose of shocking and things like that, but to tell what is the level really this thing can actually go. In just about 10 years, if you're attentive, you would have already noticed the memory deteriorating, the thinking lack of concentration, and when it comes to the ego, forgetting names. And you're not able to fully sense the other person, it becomes extremely difficult to remember their name. This is an unspoken epidemic that is spreading around the world. Unspoken, unacknowledged. Mostly people think, oh, that's just me. I'm bad at names. I'm bad at remembering. I'm bad at this. No, it's not just you. It's spread all over. And this crucial, extremely human requirement is going not because, oh, technology is bad and this, that, and the other. It's going because we are completely unaware of what is actually present in technology. So when these, first of all, start evaporating, that is what is happening out here. But even between the animal and the human, you also have your life of feeling or your experience of feeling, and there is a gradation to those feelings. For example, there is just blatant anger, there is the raw emotions, fear, terror, all of that. And then you have those feelings which are more refined, getting subtleties, observing the mood of a place, perceiving the atmosphere, knowing how a group of people are when you spend some time with them. These are the sensations that are coming from your feeling life, which do not operate in the same way as sheer anger or terror or force. Now, what happens when you have a worldview which emphasizes or actually is grounded in animal reality is the raw feelings get enhanced through the roof, and the subtle feelings start getting squashed. Just to give you a kind of comparison, when the early movies were being screened back in the 1920s, once the audience saw that a train was coming at them, they actually got up from the seats and fled. And moreover, if anybody saw a hint of someone getting killed in a movie, people would faint. People would actually faint in the movie. Not so long ago, everyone would remember Psycho. And when the movie Psycho came out, and when you have the scene with the shower and the knife, it gave nightmares to whole swaths of people. Today, a 5-year-old wouldn't blink at that. What happened? So you have a complete churning around of the emotional world, which was completely not there before. And as you look more and more deeply into these things, it has been observed among several of us who work with computers, many programmers and things like that. In fact, one excellent book that is written on this subject is by David Black. And I've mentioned it in the list of references for this conference, but David Black wrote a book called The Computer and the Incarnation of Ahriman. And he goes on to describe the transformations, some of the transformations in Boolean algebra and things like that, but then he puts a little bit of a biographical section where he is looking at how his behavior starts changing after using computer for a long time. And he mentions one thing very clearly: I somehow lost a lot of the feelings that I had before in terms of space and in terms of the refinement of things, and developed a kind of increase in the crudeness of these feelings. And from historical observation, I can give you another fact to support what he's saying. When the internet first came out, and it was still down in the basement, very few people had it, and those who did have it, they started playing games on the internet. And some of the first communities on the internet were by these gamers. Dungeons and Dragons and all sorts of games were very prevalent. And when that was happening, among the group, who were all pretty much anonymous, nobody really knew, there were no actual names there, only the handles. And for the first time, the emotions ran so high, because you're not in front of each other, the emotions ran so high and so crude that it led to the first flame war. I don't know if you are familiar with the concept of a flame war, but flame war is what happens when on an online forum or an online portal, people start bashing each other, left, right, and center. They start saying things which you'd never dream of saying face to face, but it happens. It happens, and it goes to levels which pretty much chill your spine. So why is this happening? It happens as a default, simply as a default. If we do not understand the process, it happens because the behavior of the animal is intrinsic to the way we are designing the things. Input, response. Input, response. You look at it, something goes up, and you respond. Remember those experiments where the Russian psychologist and biologist Pavlov did the experiment with the dogs, and he would ring the bell and they'll start salivating? We have a similar thing. There's a ring of a notification and we are right there to check the message. So it may not be conscious. These are, the machines are forcing us to explore parts of ourselves which we might not have looked at very clearly at all. So the reactivity of the animal kingdom and the lifelessness of the mineral kingdom, when they join, you have a world that opens up, which is the world of violence computer gaming. Violent computer gaming. Because you have, first of all, the digital world, which is basically the mineral, but then it creates images, it creates a setting to engage in all the violence that you want. And that amplifies these portions tremendously at the cost of killing away large sections of artistic sensitivity, for example. So this kind of picture, even though it might look doom and gloom for the time being, is very, very illuminating. This is what happens when technology hits us in the face and we try to recover what's actually happening. We have to follow these threads in our own inner life, step by step, to see, oh, okay, this was there, this is not there, this was enhanced, oh, this new thing came. Self-observation to a very high degree is what is required. For example, even before I had the computer on, I had the slides on, if you would have observed your own movements of the eyes, you would have noticed whenever the slide was on, your eyes wanted to look at the slides. Yes. And at some level, even if I walk in the middle, you feel disturbed. Like, get out of the way, I need to see the slide. And this is, again, not conscious, not intentional, nothing like that. It just happens. And that's, again, something that we have to watch. With the same, continuing on the same theme, there is another factor which comes in technology, which is trying to go from the mineral to the plant. What's the difference from the mineral to the plant? The plant is a structure which is incorporating time into itself. A mineral structure has time outside of it, in a sense, but a plant structure is incarnated version of time. So what does it do which is different from a mineral? It grows. It grows and it moves. Not in this way like an animal, but it has the growth movement incorporated into it. So when you're looking at technologies, for example, when a movement is shown, it is not actually a movement on the screen. When you're looking at a screen, this movement is created by a whole series of still images, right? And the opposite is true as well. Stationary nature or stationary view is not really stationary. Stationary is not stationary, movement is not movement. This is the very basis of all the screens that we use. And why do I say stationary is not stationary? Because every screen refreshes 60 or 120 times a second, depending on which part of the world you come from. So you're not looking at something which is just there. You're looking at something that is flicking so many times a second, and you don't even realize it. So that means, number one, okay, I don't realize it, but does it mean the entirety of my humanity doesn't realize it? No. There's got to be some part of us that sees that. And you know what effect that has on that part of us It's like a hammer blow, bam, 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 150 times a second. Because it's a sensory blow. So we are constantly being bombarded, literally. It's not even a phrase or a metaphor. It's actual bombardment of the sense organs, which is not going directly into the consciousness, but it's going a few levels below. What happens when that continues? The threshold of the sense organ is set somewhere else. So normally, if I'm looking at a certain amount of movement, and then I'm having this threshold reset because of what I see on the screen, suddenly, if I come out into the world, it is boring. There's not enough movement. And another thing is, when you're looking at a still screen, it is not really still, it's moving. So at another level, because of that particular on-off, on-off, on-off nature of the screen, you feel engaged with it without really knowing why. It's the same screen, it's the same piece of white. Why does this white differ from this white? Because it's not about white. It's about what is actually happening with the technical system. And all forms of technology which try to replace movement have to use these kind of tricks. So this is what is the illusion that we constantly live with. And this illusion is what we have to start to penetrate if we are to figure out ways of offsetting the illusion. So when when Steiner was talking to the teachers, the Waldorf teachers, and trying to describe, okay, how can we teach this and how can we teach that? There's a phrase that stood out when I first read it, and I don't know, it was Carl Unger or another teacher at the time. Steiner had asked the question, okay, is there any way that you can, show projective geometry by creating a transformation so that the students in the 9th and 10th grades kind of get a visual of what is happening? And I think it was Unger. Someone suggested, oh, there are movies. And Steiner mentioned, no, I don't mean in the way of deception. I mean in an actual way. I was trying to understand what deception is he even speaking about. Because after all, it's a movie, you're just showing a series of images. But realize that by faking it, by faking a movement by a series of still images, at some level, a sensitive student will know that it's a fake. And you should not, cannot ever do something like that without realizing it. So whenever you're looking at a movie, for instance, what is happening? What are the senses that are active? You have your vision and you have all the feelings that you're putting into it. Now, the first thing that happens is imagination as such is being outsourced to, of course, the television or whatever screen you have. So now that gives you a clue that if you are ever to use the technology which create images safely, that means you must be capable of creating those images yourself. Before using a technology that creates images, you need to be able to create the images. And a good test of it, just to start off with, is, if I say, okay, imagine a cube, all right? It's red at the top, blue on the side, green on this side, yellow on the bottom, and black and white on these sides. Then turn it, and then turn it this way, and then turn it the other way. Can you follow that entire exercise simply with your mind? And at the end of 5 or 6 such operations, can you remember what was on the top? Now make the colors change. Make the red become blue. Make the yellow become pale blue. Make orange become purple. And then have both of them going together. Something that simple, if you observe, automatically the mind says, oh, that's a little tricky. And why? It does that because of this resistance. The capacity of imagining, when you actually try to exercise and actually able to create a drama inside the own mind, that is the capacity that will offset the movie world. Because what is actually a movie? In the same sense that a series of still images is used to create a movement, a series of acting sessions is used to create a drama. You all know that in a movie is never shot from beginning to end all in one go, very rarely. What instead happens is you have a scene here, you have a scene there, you have a scene somewhere else, different location, different times, maybe back to front, front to back. You do the last at the beginning, beginning at the end, and then you chop and you edit and you piece it together, then you have your movie. This is one level up from what actually happens in a drama. In a drama, you're supposed to be completely present to follow what's happening. Your artistic sense is asked for, your language sense is asked for, your memory is asked for, because you have to remember what happened earlier. Your sense of ego is asked for because you have to relate completely to the characters, and the drama that happens within the characters calls on all your sensitivity of social feeling. Whatever they have in the backdrop or whatever they have as costumes, all of that requires your artistic sense. A whole gamut of experiences or capacities is what you will be requiring when you watch a drama. And now take that drama, chop it up, create a movie of it, and then watch it, and then compare the two. You'll notice that after watching a movie, a drama, the immediate reaction, again, is boring. It's too slow. A lot of the older movies, too slow. Why? Because when you're looking at technology, what it's trying to do is trying to take time and convert it into space. Because when you're looking at the mineral world, it's a spatial structure. It does not itself grow. So when you're trying to get the movements running in any of these things, you're actually having time becoming space. You lose time and it becomes space. Rather than taking a concept and seeing it after a day, seeing it after 2 days, pondering on it some more after 3 days, and then looking at it again. No, we prefer a spatial map. Time becomes space. And whenever time gets extended, it's a movement in the opposite direction to the movement that technology is actually going in. So this gives us another clue. When we're using things which are constantly at a level of 60 times per second, 100 times per second. In fact, this radio frequency that it's being used to transmit the sound, it's about 600 megahertz. That means it's close to 600,000 times a second is the kind of vibration we are talking about. So when you're looking at frequencies which are going higher and higher, you can understand that that is why we all have a feeling that we are losing time. Our time is slipping by and we are not really able to grasp it. And the way to offset it is to focus even more on longer rhythms of time that we normally would not. That means you have your daily review, or your weekly review, or your monthly review, or your yearly review, where in each of these activities you are trying to incorporate the time once more into your mind. And the more jittery the technology that you are using is, the more emphasis consciously will have to be put in the longer time cycles. What is the time cycle which is kind of in the middle of what we observe? That's our heartbeat. Anything that goes faster than the heartbeat goes upwards. Anything that goes slower than the heartbeat goes downwards. So right now we are somewhere up here, and past this is infinity. All the frequencies that are stimulating us today are somewhere up here. And that's the reason, after a long period of time, when you're using the tech, you feel like this has been connected to that. It's this portion of the brain that seems to be most receptive to computing technology. And there's a reason for that, because this is precisely the kind of frequencies that are being stimulated. The nervous system works in a flash. And that flash-like feeling is what is creating the haste in us, which prevents understanding of time. So that means in every single technology now we can wake up to a new capacity. Each of these technologies are pointing us to a capacity that we could have developed if we had paid the attention, and it is still something we can today develop if we pay the attention to it. Remember, I had mentioned over here that you had the mechanical part and the creative part for thought, the mechanical repetitive, and I was trying to say that it is not that these two are two distinct boxes, rather than the strength of the mechanical system should support the creative process. So in place of just saying, oh, creative process, need to get down into the detail, what specific creative process does each one of the technologies require? When you're using the telephone, for example, you want to talk to somebody, you pick up and you call, which is okay, we all need to do it. We are over here today talking to each other because of a ton of telephone calls that all of us have made. But what is the capacity that it is asking us to develop? The actual capacity the telephone is asking you to develop is awareness of another person. And if you go through some of the descriptions by Steiner about the 12 senses, among the higher senses, hearing comes in as well. You have hearing, you have language, you have concept, you have ego. These are the four higher senses that we have. And hearing, ability to hear someone without them being present. And of course, this is not something that you just hope that it will happen. It requires effort. In every single one of these activities, every single one of the pieces of technology that surround us is speaking to us, saying, hey, this is what you need to be putting effort on. This is what requires effort. This particular piece says you need this kind of effort. That particular piece says you need that kind of effort. When you're looking at television, you require the capacity to imagine. When you're looking at TV series, you need the ability to dramatize. When you have the capacity to dramatize inside of you, then watching a movie is way less harmful. And not only that, with this newfound strength that you get from learning about the technology, it will hopefully open up doors to different kinds of creative expressions of drama itself. Because art is also something that changes over time. Currently, we are missing that part. So we learn from the devices what it is that we need to do and take it one step forward. Imagine the internet, right? So when you go in, you type something in Google, you get 100 results, and then what happens? Your mind has to focus on the one thing that it requires and eliminate all the other things that it doesn't require. Especially when you're doing an image search or you're doing more elaborate searches, you get a whole flood of images. It's not just one movie. There are 4 movies open in different windows. So that is asking you to be able to filter through images in a systematic fashion. When 1,000 images come, you need to be able to pick or hold on to the one image that you're actually concentrating on. This, if you look at some of the spiritual scientific works, is what is called inspiration. Imagination and then inspiration. And then once you get further ahead and you look at what is happening with the social network, what are you trying to do actually in a social network? You're trying to become aware of the presence of the other person. What is today called an avatar is actually a parody of the real individuality of the person. So when you are looking at all these different profiles, we are all watching 1,000 profiles of each one of us out on the virtual world today. What is the demand? What is that kind of technology asking you to do? It is asking you, can you retain the connection to a person by yourself on your own strength and develop a relationship with the person without having to depend on anything else? So every encounter with technology is something that should throw us back upon our own resources so that we can gather the strength required to keep that sort of technology in its right place. Right? And this is still, we are talking simply offsetting. We are not looking at ideas of what other kind of technologies we need or what other kind of things can be done. That will come later. But right now, the whole focus is not to fall prey to looking at technology and saying, oh, what to do? I just got to use it. So let me just use it. Anyway, it's useful. Useful. The magic word. Once something is useful, it is the highest. And that is the trap. Yes, it is useful. But what is the capacity that it is asking us to develop, and what is the opportunity that is being missed in the process? Those are also questions that have to come up. And when the focus is on a subject like technology, number one, we have to keep in mind that a whole army of people, many of us included, obviously, are trying to build these things. And in that process of building, there is a wonderful paradox. And the paradox is there are reams of people, whole large groups of people working very hard to increase laziness in this world. Just imagine the amount of hard work it just took to make the timing right on one of those gates. And now you combine it with multiply it millionfold. So it's a very strange situation we find ourselves in. A lot of people working very hard to make ourselves lazy. And even David Black mentions this in his book. He says, what earlier I would have a hard time doing, now I do as if possessed. And this is a common experience when you're dealing with, especially with computing, you kind of feel that it is possessing you rather than you being in control of the whole process. And the reason for that is this kind of paradox that exists. Whenever you have the capacity to work so crazily and that becomes possessive, it actually starts possessing you, then it is easier and easier for larger and larger number of people to do the same thing. And when larger and larger number of people do the same thing, that as its own effect enables a lot of us to be so much more lazier, which in turn stimulates ideas about what else can be done, what else can we automate, what else can we put on the computer, and thereby the spiral goes. Right? So the only way to kind of cut through the spiral is to realize where the thing is coming from. And a lot of times when the subject of technology is being discussed, the common tendency is, again, not to dwell too much here. You want to say, okay, what are the structures we need to put into place in society so that we can prevent misuse of technology? Maybe there is a safety switch. Maybe there is a warning label. Maybe there is something else, something physical that we can do to take care of technology. Whenever the dialogue centers upon trying to address the issue of excessive technology, this is the first thing that comes up. How do we make a new rule? Right? How do we make a new rule? And another thing is, it dwells in the region of feeling. Don't be scared. Technology is good. Be hopeful. Be optimistic. Don't be pessimistic. So the solutions come out in the realm where it is not needed. The so-called solutions come out mostly over here, which in fact accelerates the problem. In fact, even the very big technological giants have started putting together groups, and they're trying to tell everybody, look, even the founders of the great tech companies, they are also saying, to their children, don't spend your life behind technology. There are even top CEOs saying, oh, I don't let my kid fool around with the smartphone, and these kind of things. But again, this is just things that you just do, you just execute. Or you say, oh, okay, you have to be careful. You have to do it a little bit. You have to keep it in control. You have to just, not do too much of it. Vague terms and vague recipes that are provided, which completely, again, do not look into the human aspect at all. If you are going to start speaking about the concept of a concept to people, you will not make many fans because it is just too abstract. Even though computing itself is so abstract and hierarchies of computing is even more abstract, still there is an automatic kind of hesitation to actually grapple with things at this level. And when you're looking at things more in the feeling level, then you're looking at, okay, so what kind of laws shall we form? What kind of safeguards shall we form? What kind of advice that we give to the educators, to the parents in general, to restrict the use of technology? There are safeguards put in so that children don't use it. Each one of these solutions lies only either in this realm or in this realm. It's about how you react to it. Right? But what is actually required is to spend sufficient time in this hard portion. To actually spend sufficient time watching our own thought process and observing how the thought process has changed. And then trying to rectify it by including more time into things. Everything requires more time. And it happens, when even in a dialogue like this or in a conversation with someone else, we are talking, and while they are talking, our mind is already coming up with 50 other things we'd already like to tell them. And on top of it all, even when the questions come, the questions have an automatic firework nature. Oh, okay, so if we do this, and then what do we do after that? And then what do we do after that? A kind of anxiousness that still penetrates our mind in spite of everything that we may come across regarding technology, how to use it, and all of that. So basically, what I'm kind of inviting you to do with me here is to introspect and observe and try to see what are those elements of current technology that you have allowed to enter your mind, your habits, your patterns, your thoughts, your senses, your feelings. Make a note of them. Try to see what it is that you can do to put more effort and time into it. Try to observe all those millions of decisions which take place during the day, millions of tiny decisions of laziness that we all do. Every single time when you say, oh, let me just look it up, versus let me try to remember for a second. All of those minute decisions, notice them, pay attention to them, see where your eyes go, see where your ears go, observe, truly observe, take back the sensations and put them on a human front. Take back all the static, repetitive habits that we have and transform them into something else. And it is only when seriously one tackles this and this will it be possible to go above this. And it is right here where the decision gets made. So, grasping technology through thought, that was the topic of this talk. And the whole grasping that has to be done is you grasp it with your very individual capacities. And try to observe how any shrinkage of time causes impatience. We are sitting in the flight and a big, huge machine is going across the air at hundreds of kilometers a second, and because our website in the plane takes 7 seconds extra to load, we are already so impatient. So in other words, that is another point. Take the feelings of impatience and convert them into feelings which sense the technology around you. When you're looking at a smartphone, wonder, how is it when I press this, this actually senses it? Go and look that up. Use technology to look up things about technology. Turn it back upon itself so that it reflects to you its real nature. When you're there in any particular place, try to observe and be attentive to all the different wires and equipment and wonder about them and put effort to figure out what it is that actually makes them tick. Something that we did with the clocks. Try to imagine doing that with every single piece of technology that you come across. Of course, it need not be something that you do all day long, but it can be something that has a special time set aside for itself. We already spend 2 hours when we plan to spend 20 minutes on the computer. So, got to reverse that.
Just wondered when you say that, something in you said, well, what about just turning it off?
What about?
What about just, instead of looking into every piece of technology,
Mm-hmm.
how it works to slow time down, what about just turning it off and going for a slow walk?
Well, you can do that, but the point is there is a purpose why the technology is even there in our lives.
Yeah.
This is more a sense of paying respect to the world, that whatever is coming to us from outside, there is still a wisdom behind it, which we may not be fully aware of. So in terms of actual switching off, yes, of course, the actual switching off of a particular technology is helpful for you to, give you the time to develop what you want to develop. But if you have not put in the time and effort to understand what it is that you're switching off and what exactly was incorporated into it, then you do not know what to use that time for. What capacity are you trying to offset, and how are you going to go about doing it? And in fact, it is true that a lot of the indications that we might kind of put together in all of this, they are already there to be elaborated in several of the works of spiritual science, particularly Carl Unger's Principles of Spiritual Science, Steiner's Theosophy, Steiner's Knowledge of the Higher Worlds. These are books which already have a whole series of exercises and things like that, which we would have had to do regardless if we want to move forward. But here, for the first time, all the technology is already telling us that. In contrast to the early 20th century, when it was completely up to the individual whether or not he embarks on such a journey, today, whether we want to embark on such a journey or not, the results or the opposites of such a journey are already hitting us. Whether you have developed imagination or not is irrelevant. The TV is there. The screens are there. Whether you have actually developed the capacity to disperse the images that come to your mind and focus on the one image, whether you have it or not, the internet gives you that. And whether you have the capacity to sense another person or not, the social network is lambasting you with everything about the world day in and day out, one after the other, one completely trivial, one completely serious, all laid out in front of you. So, to understand the tech and to go behind it and to understand what is the process that goes into it, and then figure out that that is the mechanical, materialistic version of the actual capacity that we need to develop, and then take the time to develop that. If any group of people or anybody have the serious to take such a kind of exercise fully forward, they will be the ones who will be able to open the door both to new forms of technology and new kinds of social life. And with that, I would like to conclude this talk. Thank you for your attention.